Today, we're going to add custom blocks to Minecraft. This is the third video of the Fabric modding series for Minecraft 1.21. I recommend checking out the other two videos where we made modded items and also set up the project. So if you run into any issues, I recommend checking out those videos first and then seeing if that fixes your problem. Now, let's get into it. And you'll see that the way to add custom blocks is actually very similar to the way that we added custom items here. So first things first, we're going to go to our example mod package and we're going to right click new and package. We're going to call it block. And then inside this block folder, we're going to right click in a new Java class, and we're going to call this ModBlocks. Add. Now in this class, we're going to need a way to register the blocks so that they're registered in the game. So I'm going to come down here and create public static void register ModBlocks. And then inside here, we're just going to call the logger. So whenever we call this function, there's going to be a message in the logs. So example mod, hit tab to autocomplete, .logger, tab, and then .info. And inside the info, you can see it already just is auto-suggesting register ModBlocks. I'm going to say registering ModBlocks 4, and then we're going to put our mod ID out here, which is example mod.mod ID. Now we can come over to the example mod class right in here, and we can call that. So we could say ModBlocks dot register ModBlocks. You could see it suggests we just hit tab to autocomplete, and now we've called our ModBlocks method in here. Now, if you're not sure what this is doing here, you could see this is from the ModBlocks class, and we are calling the register ModBlocks method that is from that class. And in order to make this call, we have to import the class at the top, which auto-imported when we hit tab to complete. So you could see it is importing the ModBlocks class into the example mod class so that example mod has access to this method. So that is why this notation is used. Now this should register the ModBlocks once we finish making that class. So if we come back in here, what do we need to finish registering the blocks? Well, what we're going to need to do is we need to register the block itself, and then we need to register the block item as well. Because the block is what you see when you place the block in game, you place it on the ground, you see the little cube. But the block item is if you were to drop the item on the ground, like if you dropped a stack of these blocks and you see the little floating icon, that is the mod block item. So let's come up here and make a helper function. Let's just write helper function in comments so that we know. And let's say private static void register block item. And the parameters are going to be a string, which is going to be the name of the block item, and then a block, and we're going to call that block. And you can see right here, the block, actually, let's make sure we're doing this right. So when we type out block, you'll see all these options, and make sure we're importing the one that is from net.minecraft.block, not from jcraft right here. So hover over this and then just hit tab, and it'll import the proper class. Now, inside this method, we are going to say registry and make sure we are importing the net.minecraft.registry class right here. We don't want to do the Java RMI, so hover over this one, hit tab, and it'll import that for you. And this is going to be very similar to how we registered the item, you're going to notice. So we say registry.register, and then inside the parentheses, we're going to say registries from net.minecraft.registry, tab.item, comma, identifier of, so you could see that's right there. Just hit tab, and now we're going to pass in our mod ID. So example mod.mod ID, comma, name. So this is where we pass our name parameter, comma, outside the parentheses, and say new block item. You could see this right here. We just tab to autocomplete. And inside this, we're going to pass the block parameter as well as new item.settings. And just hit tab to import that. And perfect, finish with a semicolon. Now we could see what's going on here. Registry.register is a method of the registry class that is used to register various game objects like items or blocks or entities. And registries.item is a reference to the item registry, and the item registry holds all the items in the game. So this part identifies that we are registering an item in the game. The identifier class is used to create a unique identifier for an object in Minecraft. In this case, .of example mod ID, comma name. So this is going to be the name of the object that we register. it's going to be our example mod ID, and then the name, whatever we pass in as the string, whatever name we want it. And in here, we are creating a new block item in which we pass the block parameter and we give it new item settings. So right here, this block that we're passing in basically represents the item that this block is going to correspond to in game. And then we're giving it new item settings, and we're just going to use the default item settings. If we wanted to, we could specify how many we can add to a stack and all that jazz. But in this case, we're just going to keep default item settings. Now we're going to create another helper function, which is going to help us register the block. So let's say private static block, and let's call it register block. And again, it's going to take a string as a parameter that we're going to call name, and then also a block as a parameter that we will just call block. Then out here, do the curly braces. So the first thing we want to do in this method is we want to call the register block method that we just created down here. So let's say register block item, and we're going to pass in the name and block parameters. So whenever we call this method, it is going to call this one inside of it. So we kill two birds with one stone there. Now, right below it, we're going to say return registry. And you can see this one right here, registry.register. And in this, we are going to say registries tab to complete dot block, all caps, comma, identifier of, scroll here and just hit tab to complete. And then inside this right here, we're going to say example mod dot mod ID, comma, name, and then pass in the block parameter right here. So essentially inside this method, we are registering the block item and then also registering the block. Now with these two helper methods right here, we are ready to actually create our first block. So let's come up top and say public static final block. And here we're going to call it the moonstone underscore or underscore block, all caps. And we're going to set this equal to the method that we just created. So register block. And inside here, we're going to give it the unique identifier. Let's call it, make it a string. Let's call it moonstone underscore or underscore block, comma, new block. And inside here, we're going to use an abstract block dot settings dot create. And now here we can specify certain settings that we want to give to this block. First things first, we can say dot strength, and we can make it 3F. We can also say dot requires tool. So let's come here, hit tab. And what this means is it's going to require a tool to break this block. But know that if we break this block in game, it is not going to actually drop an item yet. For that, we're going to actually have to add loot tables if we want it to drop a block when we break it, which we're going to do in a later video. So keep in mind, regardless of whether you're using a tool or not, the blocks that we create when you break them in game are not going to drop anything as of yet. And now, just because it's kind of fun, we can also make it so that this block makes a sound when we interact with it. So we could say dot sounds. And then in here, we say block sound group, and you could see all the different sounds that we can add to this block. For fun, I guess let's just make it an anvil for now. So when we break this block, it's going to sound like an anvil. Now, if you do dot, you can see all the other settings that you can add to this block if you wanted, like burnable, allows spawning, all sorts of different things. Right now, we're just going to keep it pretty basic. But yeah, you can add all sorts of settings to the block. I recommend trying that out for yourself. Now we have registered our block. This is going to be our moonstone or block, and we just need to figure out how to add it to a creative mode tab. And it's going to be very similar how we added an item to the creative mode tab. So we can come down here in our register ModBlocks method, and we'll say item group events. Scroll down right here, dot modify entries event, tab to autocomplete, and let's say item groups dot, and we're going to add it to the building blocks tab in the creative menu. So when we scroll through the creative menu, we're going to find our block in the building blocks section, and then outside the parentheses, hit dot register. And then inside this, we are going to say entries and then add a little arrow and then curly braces. And we're going to do the same thing that we did for our item class. We'll just say entries dot add and then moonstone or block. You could see it auto fills in right there. semicolon at the end. So now we have added the moonstone or block to the building blocks tab in the creative menu. So I will come up here and just say adds block to creative menu. Just a little comment so that we know what this is doing here. Now we have our block registered, we have it added to an item group, and now we just need to do the assets. And this is going to be a little bit more complicated, but bear with me. So if we come into the assets folder and example mod, let's just right click and hit new directory, and we're going to call it block states, all lowercase, all one word. And then inside models right here, we're going to right click, hit new directory, and we're going to call it block. And then same thing in textures, come down to textures, right click, new directory, and block. So let's just start out with the block states folder for now. So the block states.json file basically determines how this block looks like and behaves when we place it down in the world. So we're going to right click, new file, and we're going to call it moonstone underscore or underscore block dot JSON. And now hit enter, add. The add is just because I'm adding it to the GitHub repository. If you didn't set one up, don't worry about that. Now let's get this typed out. I'm going to type it out and then I'll explain afterwards what a lot of this means, but just follow my lead here. So we're going to do this, and in here we're going to need a model. So let's do model, and then this model will be example mod colon block slash moonstone underscore or underscore block. So that is the entire block states JSON file that we're going to need for our mod block that doesn't have any changes. So if we consider iron, or not iron, but copper will rust. And so that has different states and changes that it's going to go through. But in this example, our block is not going to have any changes. And so this is what that looks like. So the copper block would have an age state where it ages, but this block, our basic block, doesn't have any variants. So that is what this empty string right here means. And it also has a model. And what is this model pointing to? And we can see, well, it is example mod. So example mod, model, models, block, block, and then it's going to look for moonstone or block.json file, which we are going to create right now. So down in models, block, hit new file, and we're going to call it moonstone underscore or underscore block.json. And now in here, we're going to do something that looks very similar to the moonstone ingot JSON file that we did over here and the moonstone or for the item files. What we are going to type out here though is, we need a parent, and this parent will be Minecraft colon block slash cube underscore all, comma, and then textures. This is where we're going to specify the texture. So, and don't forget to add the block here. We're going to say all, and then example mod in a string colon block slash moonstone underscore or underscore block. Looking at this, it looks very similar to this file over here, and that is correct. The only differences are really the parent and then also the texture that we have here, basically. So the parent of the ModBlock.json file basically determines how does this block look? How is it going to be displayed in game? And so it's going to be displayed like a block, and this cube all means that all 6 sides of the cube are going to have the same texture. We're not going to give any other textures to any other sides. Like a grass block would have a different texture for the top than it does for the bottom and also the sides. But in this case, all 6 sides are going to have the same texture. And then the texture over here, you can see that this texture is going to point to example mod right here, textures, block, and then it's going to search for the moonstone underscore or underscore block.png file. So it's going to be the image that is the texture that it's going to use for this block for all 6 sides of it. So basically, we just had to create one PNG image that is a 16 by 16 square a 16 by 16 pixel square. It's the cube that I made. You're going to find all these files in the GitHub repository and linked in the description, but that is going to be the image that's used for all 6 sides of this cube. And so let's add that PNG image right now. So let's open up the folder, and here we have Moonstone or block, drag, hold control so that we copy it into here. And you can see textures, block, copy it. Okay, perfect. And now here, in this, we have our texture, and this is going to be the texture of all 6 sides. So now if we were to hop inside of the world, our block would have a texture in the game, but it would not have a texture in the inventory yet. And it also wouldn't have a proper name because we didn't add a translation for it in our en_us.json file. So we're going to do that now. But if you do skip this step, then you're going to have your block, but when it's in your inventory, it's going to be that violet and black block still. And we don't want that. We want to fix that. So to fix that, we need to add an item.json file because there is no texture in the inventory because that is a block item. We have the block texture, but not the item texture, the block item texture that refers to this block item. So to do that, let's go into models, item, right click, new file, and let's call it moonstone_or_block.json. Okay, and now this is super simple. So all we need is a parent, and then in that parent is going to be example mod colon block slash moonstone_or_block. So basically what this is doing is it's pointing back to this moonstone_or_block.json file that's in our models block folder. And it's saying that the item texture that's going to be displayed in the inventory is just going to point back to this one and give it the same texture that is applied to this block. And it's going to display it in the same way that we're used to seeing the 3D blocks, like the little cubes in the inventory. So that's what this is doing right here. Where is it? That's what this is doing right here. And now the last thing we need to do is add the translation. So it's come over to lang and then en_us.json. And it's going to be very simple, just like the other 2 entries we added for the item. But in this case, it's a block.examplemod.moonstone_or_block. And what we are going to translate it to is going to be block of moonstone or. And now we should have everything we need for our custom block. We have our blockstates.json file, which determines what model this block is going to take on inside of the world. And then we need that specific model that it points to, which basically just determines how that 3D block is going to be rendered in the world, and also what texture it is going to use for the sides of the block. And then we also need the item.json file that's going to determine what model and what texture this block is going to use when it's being displayed inside the inventory. And then, of course, we need to add the translation and the texture itself down here. Nope, down here. But yeah, with all that, we should be able to hop inside the game and see our custom block. So let's do that up here, hit Minecraft client and run. Okay, so we've loaded up. Let's go in here into our example world. All right, now we've loaded up and you can see we have our custom items from the last video, but let's open up the inventory, go inside building blocks, scroll to the bottom, and here we have it, block of moonstone or. Look at that. And of course, it's making the anvil sound that we assigned to it. So now it's going to make that sound whenever we place it, which I think is pretty awesome. So that's pretty cool, but let's also add a second block, and that's a little bit obnoxious. I'm going to stop doing that. So let's get back into IntelliJ and add a second block right now. And you're going to see it's a much easier process than it was to add this first block, as was with the items. So now back in IntelliJ, let's add the second block. Let's go back to our ModBlocks class right here and scroll up to the top. Here's our first block you could see. Let's just scroll right beneath it. And we need to say public static block, and it's going to be very similar to the process that we used for making the first block. Almost, it's actually going to be the same process. So we're going to call this one moonstone_block, and we're going to set this equal to register block right there, the function or the method that we have created down here, our helper function. Inside this, we need a string, and this is going to be the unique identifier. Let's call it moonstone_block. I just hit tab and it literally put in all these settings for us, and these are basically the settings that we need. So let's keep it the same strength, 3F. I think that's a good strength, and it's a new block. We're creating abstract block settings right here, and we can add certain attributes and characteristics to this block if we wanted to. So let's just say down here, dot requires tool, perfect, and then block sounds. Maybe, I don't know, let's keep the anvil for consistency, or maybe let's change it to, oops, didn't mean to do that. Let's change it to amethyst block, because that sounds pretty cool. I know that's going to lack consistency between these two blocks, but let's just do it for fun right now. Now, with the block registered, we need to add it to the creative tab. So we can come down here where we have this function right here, the register ModBlocks function. And inside here, just below the entries of our moonstone ore, let's do entries.add moonstone_ore_block. And you can see that it just auto fills it for me. Now we need to go through all the other JSON files again, but this time it's going to be much easier. So let's go to the JSON file and add our translation first, because this is necessary for any modded item that we're adding. So let's say block.example_mod.moonstone_block. And what do we want to translate it to? What do we want the name to be in game when we hover over it? Let's just call it block of moonstone. Okay, I think that's a good name. And you could see I have a typo here. That would not be good. Let's fix that real quick. Moonstone. You want to be very careful you don't make any typos in these files, because it's not going to warn you of that. Now for the block states JSON file, this is going to be very easy. We need to add another block states JSON file, but something we can do here that makes life a lot easier is that we know that the JSON file is going to look almost identical to this one, other than the fact that it's got a different name. So what we can do is we can drag it right here and then hold Control and just copy it into the same folder. But now we want to change the name to moonstone_block.json. And let's create this file. And it's identical to the other one that's in this folder, but let's go into it and change that real quick. All we got to do is delete this OR. And now we have the proper model, moonstone_block. So now this JSON file is done. We just need to do the same thing for the block JSON file. So let's come down here, do the exact same thing, drag it, hold Control into the same folder. Let's just delete OR right here. So now we have moonstone_block.json. Perfect. And let's go into here and change the name so that that matches with our new block that we created. But we want it to render the exact same way with a different texture here in that case. But again, we want all 6 sides to be the same texture, and we want it to render like a regular old Minecraft block. Okay. Now we do this one more time for the item model JSON file. So come down here and we have moonstone_block.json. Drag it, Control, and into the item folder. Again, change the name, and let's come on in here, moonstone_block.json. Change the name up in here, and perfect. And now we just need to add the texture, which again are linked in the description. You can find them in my GitHub repository. So let's use the moonstone_block.png that we have these configurations pointing to. So drag it into textures, block, right there, hit add, and perfect. That's going to be the texture that we're using. And again, if you want to see how I created these textures, I can make a different video on that. I used a different application to do it, but if you're interested, I can do that for you. Just let me know. And yeah, now we're ready to hop inside the game and actually see our second block. And this process was so much easier than adding the first block. As you can see, it was so much quicker. If you still don't know how to do it, I'm telling you, just add a bunch of different random blocks to the game, and you just got to get the reps in. At that point, you'll start recognizing what to do. You'll notice the patterns, and you'll start getting the hang of it. Go to Minecraft client, run it, and let's see our second block in game. Okay, so we got the client loaded up. Let's open up the window, make it full screen, and load up the world that we created. And that was pretty quick. Now let's go inside the inventory, building blocks again. We added it to the same creative tab. That's what I meant earlier when we were adding it to a creative group. These are all different item groups right here. We added our items that we made in the last video in the ingredients tab. We added these ones to the blocks tab. So let's scroll to the bottom and boom, here we have it. So let's pull it out and that makes some pretty nice noises also. But yeah, that is our custom block in game. If you want to learn how to add a custom item group, which is like one of these things, we can add an actual tab in here where we can add our modded blocks. I'm going to be doing that in the following video. And then we're also going to be adding loot tables and that type of stuff so that when we break the block, we're going to be able to pick up the block and it's going to drop an item, and then also crafting recipes and stuff. And then in the future, we're going to do custom mobs, and that's going to be great. Can't wait to show you guys. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. If you did, you surely will learn something in the next video, and I hope to see you there. Peace.